Today we will explain how you can catch more waves by choosing the right surfboard. Your surfboard has a big influence on your wave count, much more than for instance your fitness level. And the key to catching more waves is paddle speed. The faster your board paddles, the faster you will be able to go to the takeoff zone and the easier it will be to take the wave itself. If you understand the influence of all the different board parameters on paddle speed, you will be able to choose the right board in any condition. There's a lot of confusion about what exactly affects this paddle speed and why, so let's break it down and explain the magic. Let's start with the basics. A surfboard has to be good at two things: paddling and surfing. And unfortunately, a board behaves totally different when we paddle and when we surf. When we paddle, a board behaves as a displacement hull, and when we surf, a board behaves as a planing hull. A displacement hull has to push water aside in order to move forward, so it has to displace water. And then when the speed goes up, the board or the hull will start to rise out of the water and it will start to plane. So we need speed to get from displacement mode into planing mode. Now the paddle force is not enough to get into this planing mode. We need more speed, and that speed comes from gravity. So gravity gives us that extra speed to be able to start to plane. Now, since this video is all about catching waves, we will focus on paddling. So we will focus on how a surfboard behaves in displacement mode. When a displacement hull moves, it pushes water up and to the side, and that movement creates also a wave. This has nothing to do with the waves we surf. It is a small wave created by the movement itself. This is how that small wave looks from the side. So if a displacement hull moves forward, whether that is a boat or a surfboard, it will create a small wave. There's two parameters that are important. It's the wave length. This is the distance from one top to the next one, and the length of the displacement hull at the waterline. So this is measured from here to here. So let's see what happens now if we move faster. If the boat goes faster, then the speed of the wave that is traveling with the boat will also go up. And if the speed of a wave goes up, then the wavelength also increases. So here we have the wavelength at half of the length of the boat. And let's see what happens if we increase the speed even further. Here we move at the speed where the wavelength becomes the same as the length of the boat. This is a critical point because here the back of the boat and the front of the boat are still at the same height. This is called the hull speed, and this is the last efficient speed of a displacement hull. Because if we try to go even faster, this will happen. The back of the boat will go down and the front of the boat will go up. So we are actually trying to climb the wave that we created. There's a lot of power needed to be able to go to this speed, and our paddle power is not enough to do this. So it's important to understand that our paddle speed has a limit, and that limit is related to the length of our surfboard. Because if we simply increase the length of our surfboard, it will sit again leveled in the water. So traveling at this speed is easy for the longer red one and not for the shorter black one. We saw that this maximum paddle speed is related to the length at the waterline. So if we take a board with the same length but with a different rocker, we see that the board with the low rocker has a longer length at the waterline than the one with more rocker. So this means that the maximum paddle speed of this one is bigger than the maximum paddle speed of that one. There is a formula to calculate this maximum paddle speed or hull speed, but I know surfers usually don't like formulas, so I'm gonna give you an idea. A 6-foot board has a maximum paddle speed of around 6 kilometers an hour, and for a 9-foot board this is around 7.5 kilometers an hour. But the conclusion is that when we paddle, our speed is limited, and that speed, maximum paddle speed, is fully related to the length of our surfboard that sits in the water. So the longer our board, the bigger that maximum paddle speed is, and if the board has the same length, it's the one with less rocker that has a bigger maximum paddle speed. So now we know there is a maximum paddle speed, but that's not enough. If we want to catch more waves, we also need to know how fast can we go to that maximum paddle speed. If it takes forever to get there, it doesn't really help us. In order to go fast to our maximum paddle speed, we need to avoid all kinds of drag. So what is drag? Drag is resistance. So if we move in this direction, drag is a force opposite of our movement. So it's something that holds us back. So let's take an example. We're going to look at a 6-foot surfboard. We're going to look what happens when we paddle 2 kilometers an hour, 5 kilometers an hour and 6 kilometers an hour. There's 3 types of drag. It's friction drag, form drag and wave drag. And we already saw that when we paddle, we create a wave ourselves, a small wave, and this is this wave drag. And that's the reason why at 6 kilometers an hour for a 6-foot surfboard, it's finished. That's the maximum paddle speed because of this wave drag. So now we want to go as fast as possible to that limit. So we will try to reduce these two, friction drag and form drag. So let's start to paddle. Paddle very slow, 2 kilometers an hour. Then 85% of the drag will come from friction. What is friction drag? Is you have a surface and another surface. They slide over each other, there will be friction, so it will hold us back. To reduce this friction drag, it's important that our surfboard has a smooth surface. So it should be nicely sanded down, and then very important, no wax on your bottom or your rails. It's very important when you paddle, it's even more important when you surf. So no wax on the bottom, no wax on the rails. Another thing we can try to do is to minimize the wetted surface. What is wetted surface? Is everything that is wet. When you put your board in the water, your bottom's gonna be wet, part of your rails will be wet, probably not the tip of your nose, but it's everything that is wet. We already see now that a longboard which has a lot of wetted area, a lot of wetted surface, gonna be a slow starter. Because 85% comes from this friction drag. A longboard has a huge wetted surface, so that's going to be a slow starter. Now, let's paddle, keep paddling. We paddle at 5 kilometers an hour, so we paddle full speed now. Then friction drag is still important, but now form drag will become important as well. And how we can avoid form drag? First one is to minimize the apparent area. Apparent area is the area you see as the board travels towards you. We are interested in the area that sits below the water, so we are looking at this red area. How can we reduce apparent area? We can choose, for instance, for a board with low rocker. A board with a lot of rocker has a lot of apparent area. So choosing for one that has low rocker has less form drag. We can also choose for a board that makes us sit higher in the water. For instance, a wider board is going to make us sit higher, so the apparent area in the water is less. And then another thing we have a lot of influence on is our position on the board when we paddle. If you lie in the back, your board's going to have a lot of apparent area in the water. So make sure when you paddle, you're nicely flat on the surface of the water. The other one is to choose for a streamlined object to avoid form drag. And this is, for instance, no blunt object. For instance, a pointy nose is better than a full round nose. And also no abrupt changes. So your rail should go from thin, gradually thicker, and then gradually thinner again. Same for the rocker. Everything gradual is better for having a streamlined object. So now we know there is a maximum paddle speed. We also know now what's holding us back to get as fast as possible to that maximum paddle speed. So now let's look at the actual paddle speed of some boards. Let's have a look at the paddle speed of two different boards. We're going to look at the short board, 6 foot, and we're going to look at the 9-foot long board. This is the paddle speed. It's 3, 4.5, 6, 7.5 kilometers an hour. And this is the time, 2, 4, 6, 8 seconds. In blue is the shortboard, so you can see that the shortboard goes quite fast to its maximum paddle speed. The longboard in red, it takes longer, but the maximum paddle speed is bigger. So in the beginning, you can see that the longboard is slower because first of all, it's heavy, so it takes longer to go to its speed. Second, there's a lot of wetted surface. Remember, there's a lot of friction drag in the beginning. So that's why in the beginning it's slower. At 4 seconds, they have both more or less the same speed, but the shortboard is already at its maximum. And then at 6 seconds, also the longboard reaches its maximum speed, which is 7.5 kilometers an hour. Now it's important to notice that the first 4 seconds, the shortboard was always faster, which means that the distance covered in these 4 seconds is a lot bigger with your shortboard than with your longboard. And taking a wave, 2 things are important: positioning, so going to the takeoff spot, and catching the wave itself. In positioning, it is the distance that you can cover plus how fast you can go to your paddle speed that are very crucial. So, for instance, short periods, well, you sit in the water, there is a wave, it passes, the next wave is already there, 8 seconds. So you have 8 seconds to decide, I'm going to take the wave, position yourself and have some initial speed to take the wave. So in this case, it might be a good idea to think of your shorter board. Another example is a beach break with a lot of shifting peaks. So the same thing, you have to decide fast, I'm going to go there, positioning is important, and then have some initial speed fast. So again, your shorter board might be a good option. And the same principle for crowded. So a lot of people fighting for the same wave, fast decisions, fast going to your initial speed. When you have in your quiver a 7-foot board and an 8-foot board, the principle is the same. So consider in these situations to go for your 7-foot board, your shorter board, because you're going to go faster to the speed that you need. Now for the second part, catching the wave itself, it is the paddle speed at a certain moment that is more important. It can be that your 6-foot shortboard with a limit of 6 kilometers an hour, that this is not enough anymore to be able to catch the wave. It can be that our paddle speed needs to be bigger. And that's when we have to consider a longer board. And this is the next item we're going to look at. If we want to catch a wave, our paddle speed needs to match the speed of the wave. Now very quick on wave speed, we have open ocean and we have surf. In open ocean, a wave has a certain height, a certain wavelength. This is measured from one peak to the other. It has a certain wave speed and it has a certain wave period. Wave period is when this wave passes and the next one is there, it's the time between the 2 peaks. When the wave period is big, the wavelength is big and then also the wave speed is big. That's why when a new swell arrives to land, first the waves of 14 seconds arrive and then the ones of 13, 12 and so forth, because the waves of 14 seconds, they travel faster, so they arrive first. Now in the surf, the waves approach land, they feel the bottom and they are slowed down. A wave of 1 meter breaks where it's 1.3 meter deep. A wave of 2 meters breaks where it's 2.6 meters deep, so there is a factor 1.3. Now the more they move to shallow area, the more they are slowed down. So a big wave is going to break deeper, so it's not slowed down much, so it's going to have a big wave speed. A wave with a big wave period, so it's going to also have a big wave length, so there's a lot of water in that wave. When it's squeezed, it's going to be also very high. So also very high, but with a big wave period, the wave speed in open ocean was already big, plus it's going to be a big wave, it's going to break deeper, so it will not be slowed down that much, so the wave speed in the surf will be huge. With everything we know, let's look at the final stage, catching the wave. We already saw that the paddle speed has a limit and that the paddle speed alone is not enough to catch the wave. We need some help, and that help comes from gravity. The help of gravity is actually the gravity itself plus the buoyancy. The buoyancy keeps us out of the water. So to make it simple, I call these two together help gravity. Now we will try to catch this wave. This wave is moving in this direction and it's moving with this wave speed. We are moving in this direction and our movement has a horizontal component and a vertical component. So if we want to catch this wave, our horizontal component needs to match this wave speed. If it is not, the wave will just pass us by. So let's make the drawing a bit more simple. So we need to make sure that these points align and these points align in order to take the wave. Now let's see what happens if we want to take a bigger wave. We saw that bigger waves travel faster, so there is some extra speed added here. If we want to catch this wave, we will have to find something that adds some extra speed here. We make the drawing again a bit more simple. There's two ways to add extra speed. Option 1. Let's say we want the same slope, 45 degrees, rather easy takeoff, so not too steep. Then there will be no extra help from gravity, so it will all have to come from paddle speed. If at one point we are at our limit of the paddle speed, the only way to further increase it is to take a longer board. So the only way to take a bigger wave on the same 45 degrees slope is to take a longer board. Now let's go back to our shorter board. So now option 2, we stick to our shorter board. The paddle speed is limited, so we cannot add any extra speed here. So the extra speed needs to come from gravity. And the only way to do that is to take off in a steeper wave. So let's look what happens in a steeper wave. So let's adjust the direction. So this was the extra speed we needed when we took this big wave at 45 degrees. Now you see that this is not even enough. We will have to add even more speed. So the total increase of speed to be able to catch this wave is very big now. That means if you stick to your shorter board in big waves, the takeoff will be very fast, very critical. And if you don't want to take off that steep, you will simply not be able to catch the wave. So the shorter your board, the steeper and faster your takeoff will be. That was a lot of information. Let's summarize. I made an overview with the conditions on the top and the level on the side. This is all-round conditions, meaning nothing specific. This is short period swell, shifting peaks and a crowded lineup, meaning positioning is very important. And these are fast waves, meaning big, or a big wave period, meaning catching the wave itself is very important. We have beginner, intermediate, and we have experienced. This is level 1 to 5 and this is level 6 to 8. Actually, these numbers come from an online tool we created. It takes all these parameters into account and it recommends the right board for you in any condition based on your preferences. I will include the link in the description below. Let's start with beginner, intermediate. All-round conditions, you want to catch more waves. Best thing to do is increase your length because your takeoff will be just easier. Slope is not too steep. Don't exaggerate in increasing your length. You don't have to go to a longboard, a 9-foot longboard, because the time that you're going to go to your maximum paddle speed is just too long. So no need to exaggerate. Another thing you can do is reduce the rocker because your maximum paddle speed will go up and also the time to go to your maximum paddle speed will be reduced. If you are in the situations where positioning is very important, normally I would say take a shorter board because then your positioning will be better, but your takeoff will be too steep. So especially for beginners, I wouldn't recommend to go for shorter. Learn to anticipate, learn to judge fast, that's the wave I want to take. Learn that the preparation time is just a bit bigger, but don't go straight away to a shorter board. What you can do is get a board with reduced rocker or just go for a wider board. If you want to take fast waves, then the only option is actually go longer. For an experienced surfer as well, if you want to take more wave, increasing the length is always a good idea. If you can handle steep takeoffs, maybe you can just go for reduced rocker. If this positioning situation is very important, reduce the length, but mainly reduce friction drag or form drag. Remember, friction drag reduce wetted surface, form drag reduce the apparent area. You can always do that by reducing the rocker. Another option you can do is choose for an epoxy board. An epoxy board is lighter, so it sits higher in the water, so less apparent area, also a little bit less wetted surface. So you're going to be better in positioning fast to the wave. And then if you want to go big, just same thing, increase your length. These tips should give you a good start for catching more waves simply by choosing the right surfboard. I hope you now have a better understanding of the dynamics of catching waves, and I also hope by using this knowledge you increase your wave count. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want more tips on surfboards. See you next time.